When it comes to the highbrow awards, horror is one genre that always seems to get the shaft. Released in 1991, Silence of the Lambs is one of the few that receive critical praise to that level, winning the Academy Awards for Best Picture, Director, Adapted Screenplay, Leading Actor, and Actress, along with a handful of other accolades. One watch is enough to see why. It is a well-crafted, crossover genre film and a faithful adaptation of Thomas Harris's novel. Taking place several years after the Red Dragon incident, FBI trainee Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, is assigned to interview incarcerated psychiatrist Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins, under the pretext of data collection. This pretext is a smokescreen, as Starling's supervisors want Lecter's opinion on Buffalo Bill, a killer who abducts and flays women. This want is put into overdrive when Buffalo Bill abducts the daughter of a U.S. senator. During the course of several conversations, Lecter slowly divulges information about Bill, while at the same time delving into Clarice's psyche via personal information she shares in exchange. In the end, Lecter's information helps the FBI, but he also escapes. The film's production originally began with a partnership between Orion Pictures and Gene Hackman, who was set to direct and possibly star as Lecter. Film rights were secured, along with the rights to the Hannibal Lecter name, which at the time were owned by Manhunter producer Dino De Laurentiis. With both secured, Ted Talley was brought on to write the screenplay. When Talley was halfway through his first draft, Hackman jeopardized production by withdrawing from the project, as he was uncomfortable with taking on violent roles after Mississippi Burning. Talley continued to write as Orion searched for a replacement director. Jonathan Demme was selected, and although hesitant at first, he signed on after reading the novel. While it wasn't his first film, it is the one he's most associated with, along with Philadelphia. In my opinion, he did an excellent job. His shots are well thought out, and the lighting complements the artistic ones. While it is not directly in his hands, the editing complements Demme's style, especially during the extremely tense moments. While not the first casting choice, Anthony Hopkins is perfectly cast as Lecter. He's creepy and unnerving while giving off an air of sophistication and intellect. He maintains this air at all times, only dropping it subtly when he's annoyed. As part of his research, Hopkins studied the files of several serial killers and even observed a few in prison. He also based part of his performance on a friend in London, who Hopkins said unnerved people by never blinking. Once he described Lecter as being like Hal from 2001, a highly complex, highly intelligent, highly logical killing machine who seems to know everything going on around him. My only complaint about his Oscar win is the category in which he was nominated. Lecter is important to the plot, but in the grand scheme, he is a supporting character. Other than his acting, Hopkins contributed two things to the film. While filming Lecter's introduction, he suggested that the character should be watching the camera as it panned into view, as it would establish the all-knowing character trait. It works, but it also plays into Lecter's dedication to courtesy. He is an odd gentleman expecting a guest, so he stands to greet her. The second contribution was the color of Lecter's outfit during his escape. Originally, Demme planned to have Lecter dressed in yellow or orange, but Hopkins suggested white, arguing it would be more unsettling, which I have to agree with. White is typically used to symbolize purity, and having a cannibalistic killer wear the color while escaping destroys traditional symbolism, an action that falls in line with certain things the Doctor says. One cannot discuss the character of Hannibal Lecter without this subject coming up. Who played the part better, Cox or Hopkins? Personally, I feel they both played the character well, and more importantly, in different ways. Cox is a bit more down-to-earth, whereas Hopkins is more cold and unnerving. Having read the books multiple times, I feel neither interpretation is wrong. It comes down to what tone the film is going for, along with what an individual audience member finds terrifying. I know some prefer Cox because his Lecter is more likely to blend into a crowd, whereas Hopkins' demeanor makes him more likely to stand out. While it's not wrong, I must point out that Hopkins' demeanor could be part of Lecter's mind games. While it's close, I'd be lying if I said I didn't picture Hopkins' portrayal more when I reread the books, but in Cox's defense, there are times when his comes forward as well. They're just two sides of the same madman. Like her co-star, Jodie Foster was not the first choice to play Clarice Starling. Jonathan Demme originally wanted Michelle Pfeiffer in the role, as he had just worked with her on Married to the Mob, but she turned it down as she was uncomfortable with the subject matter. Foster persisted, as she seriously wanted the role, and at one point had attempted to purchase the film rights. Eventually, Demme was won over. The director later said he was convinced to cast Foster when he purposely saw her walking down a corridor, seeing something in her determination. In addition to determination, Foster played Clarice with the right amount of vulnerability. She's susceptible to Lecter's calculated words, and at times allows her emotions to overtake her, but not to the point where she fully loses focus. She is the perfect foil for the Mad Doctor, and this dynamic is part of what makes their relationship intriguing. They have a strange chemistry, a relationship that is the film's heart. Clarice interests Lecter, She isn't his intellectual equal, but he sees promise in the young agent and does his best to nurture her in his own dark way. He wants her to think outside the box, to not let textbook descriptions cloud her critical thinking. In turn, Clarice respects Lecter and his intellect. She knows he is a great asset, but also knows what he is capable of. Despite this, she puts herself in his hands by divulging a painful childhood experience, something Lecter could exploit for personal amusement. Strangely, other than a few brief comments, Lecter is silent, acting more like a psychiatrist than a sadist. Perhaps Lecter has a heart after all. Scott Glenn plays FBI agent Jack Crawford. While his casting isn't as perfect as Hopkins or Foster, he plays the character well, even though a few of his more critical moments ended up on the cutting room floor. To prepare for the role, Glenn spent time with John Douglas, the FBI agent Crawford is modeled after. During this time, Glenn listened to tapes recorded by the Toolbox Killers, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Lewis Norris, of One Crime. He turned the tape off after a minute and later said he lost a sense of innocence from the experience, as he was unable to forget the contents. He also changed his stance on the death penalty. While it was a bad personal experience, Glenn channeled some of that loss into his performance. His Crawford comes off as a man who cares for the victims, but has become numb from first-hand experience with heinous crimes. Ted Levine plays our main antagonist, James Buffalo Bill Gum. He comes across as terrifying, but every now and then a hint of inadequacy seeps into his performance, which fits given Gum's backstory. Only a hint is given compared to the novel, but it's more than enough to inform the audience. Including Gum's full backstory could have made the character sympathetic, but it would have hurt his mystique, although it would have commented more on the nurture debate. An interesting fact that everyone in the internet age knows is that Gum contains traits from 3 real-life killers. He skins his victims like Ed Gein, uses an injury to attract victims like Ted Bundy, and he keeps them in his basement like Gary Heidnik. Howard Shore composed a masterful score. It is subtle when it has to be and dramatic when it needs to be, underlying each scene perfectly. I tried to write in a way that goes right to the fabric of the movie, he said. I tried to make the music just fit. When you watch the movie, you are not aware of the music. You get your feelings from all elements simultaneously: lighting, cinematography, costumes, acting, music. Jonathan Demme was very specific about the music. Filming primarily took place in Pennsylvania, commencing on November 15th, 1989, and wrapping on March 1st, 1990. Some scenes were filmed in West Virginia, and the FBI even allowed some scenes to be filmed at Quantico, which was rare at the time. The release date was originally set for fall of 1990, but was pushed back to January so Orion could focus on pushing Dances with Wolves for Oscar consideration. While normally considered a death sentence, the film grossed over $100 million. The film grossed over $100 million on a $19 million budget. It also won over a majority of critics, with Gene Siskel being the only mainstream one to give a negative review. Upon release, the film was criticized by members of the LGBT community for the character of Buffalo Bill casting a negative light on transsexuals. With all due respect, did they pay attention? Billy is not a transsexual. He is a tormented man who hates his identity and is trying to literally transform himself. Feminist and women's rights activist Betty Friedan also had words regarding the film's subject matter. I'm not denying the movie was an artistic triumph, but it was about the evisceration, the skinning alive of women. That is what I find offensive, not the Playboy centerfold. While Betty is entitled to her opinion, she is overlooking one other factor in order to make her point. While the film does contain moments of female disempowerment, what some now might refer to as the patriarchy, part of its overall message is female empowerment. Our main protagonist is a woman. While a norm for the slasher genre, at the time a film like this would have had a male lead. That alone breaks conventions, but our heroine also tracks down and overcomes our antagonist, laying to rest her own demons and saving the damsel. Heck, one could even argue that the way Starling kills Billy is a shot at firearm phallic symbolism. While it's true that Clarice does receive help from the men around her, it doesn't weaken her character. If anything, it makes her more human and allows her to grow from life experience. Having Lecter give her all the answers without maturity would have been a disservice to her character and to the film's feminist undertones. One would think a feminist would be able to see that. Silence of the Lambs is an excellent, well-paced film and one of my favorite in the genre. The cinematography, acting, and music are perfect. The only negative things I have to say are that the editing could be hard to follow at points if you're not paying attention, and I'd be lying if I said Lecter's slurping mannerism wasn't detestable. A few were filmed, and having watched them on the DVD, I can understand why they were deleted. Some might label it overrated, and I fully understand why. It's just not a label I would personally give the film. If I did, my liver would end up on the menu.